Welcome back to Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We have in the program attorney Vinod Nichani. Vinod, welcome.
Thank you.
You also go by Vinny.
I go by Vinny, yes.
There you go. And the name of your law firm?
Nichani Law Firm.
Perfect. Now, you, in your creative practice, handle several areas of law.
That's correct.
Which are what?
We practice in bankruptcy law, real estate law, trust and estates,
Okay.
and we also represent real estate professionals in front of the Bureau of Real Estate.
Perfect. Now, today we want to speak about bankruptcy. And so no matter whether it's a recession or prosperity, people have to file or want to file bankruptcy.
That's correct. Bankruptcy is, and especially in these days, it's not only something to stop a foreclosure, but it's also used as a strategy or a business tool in many senses.
I see.
So, although many individuals who file bankruptcy are concerned about, in the community or the public eye as I have filed bankruptcy, the truth is it's an excellent business tool. And at the end of the day, it could make you more money than you might have lost if you use it as a proper strategic tool.
Okay. Now, often we have spoken in the past, you had mentioned oftentimes somebody filing bankruptcy might have a lot of equity in a home, but they don't have a lot of cash.
That's correct. Bankruptcy can be filed the night before a foreclosure. We can file a bankruptcy, it's all electronic these days, so we pretty much press a button on our computer and we notify the company that's selling the property that a bankruptcy has been filed, and in most cases the sale will not go through. Now,
wow.
A lot of individuals I see in this area are equity rich and cash poor. So their properties are worth maybe over $1 million, but financially they just can't make it. They don't have the income, they don't have the job, whatever it may be, and they can't go out there and rent another property, nor do they want to lose the equity in their property. So sometimes what we do is, let's say a client comes into our office, they come in, they give me a call, they say, hey, we have our foreclosure set for next Wednesday, what do we do? So they come in we have an initial consultation, they come on in, we sit down, we chart out their situation, and we say, okay, we're going to file something called an emergency bankruptcy for you. Now, the bankruptcy petition is about this big. It's a lot of paperwork.
Wow.
It's like going to escrow and signing all those papers. That's
Sure,
what it is.
Sure.
But the emergency bankruptcy is about 5 to 6 pages. And we discuss the best chapter for them to file. Now, there are tons of chapters of bankruptcy. There's a chapter 15, which is cross-border. There's a chapter 12, which is agricultural. There's a chapter 7, liquidation. There's a chapter 13, wage earner, bankruptcy, and there's a chapter 11, reorganization.
Okay, because we typically hear about 3.
Correct.
Right.
You typically hear about a 7, 13, and 11. Now, when it comes to individuals, generally you won't really hear about 11s, but since the debt is so high in our valley, the secured loans on homes, meaning the mortgages, are so high that they go beyond the limits that a general chapter 13 would allow you.
I see.
Okay, so let's kind of go on a snapshot on the type of chapters. The chapter 7 is a liquidation. That pretty much says, hey, you can have what I got. I got nothing. Just get rid of my debt. I'm done in 3 months. Okay.
Okay.
So you imagine after the client comes to my office and we decide that, hey, a chapter 7 is good for you. When we say that most likely means they have no equity in their property and they got nothing.
That's what I was going to say. So that's not the house rich, cash poor person.
Correct. Unless there is an amount, let's say, of equity, $75,000 or $100,000, which could be protected by something called a homestead exemption. Mm-hmm. So that could be protected. But like everything else, there's strings attached to that.
Yeah.
So in most cases, you're going to see chapter 13s and chapter 11s. Okay. The most popular being the chapter 13 would be something called a wage earner bankruptcy. And that's because you need wages. You need income to be in that BK. It's, in the simplest terms, it's pretty much working with your creditors and working with the trustee. The trustee is the person who looks over all your bankruptcy petition, your income, your taxes, and calculates whether or not that monthly payment you're paying for 3 or 5 years is fair and reasonable and satisfactory to resolve the debts with the creditors.
Okay. Let me just tie this in. So in terms of the home, we're protecting the homes that they need a place to live,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if they have a family, they want to stay in the house.
Right.
So we want to protect the home as it stands now as a residence. And the wording that you down here, automatic stay, auto stay.
Automatic stay, correct. So when you file bankruptcy, there's this protective shield that comes on you. It's called the automatic stay, okay? And when that automatic stay kicks in, creditors cannot go through the stay. Maybe I'll do it in pink. Creditors cannot go through the stay and foreclose.
I see.
They can't do that. Once the automatic stay is gone, they can do what they like and they can go through. Okay?
I see.
So the bankruptcy is the creator of the automatic stay. Okay? So when you have that automatic stay, that stops the foreclosure.
Mhm. And that's a bankruptcy.
Right.
Will get you the automatic stay.
Correct. So in this particular picture here, we have someone who has a house and they say, hey, you know what, our foreclosure is next week. Can we file the bankruptcy? And we're going to file that emergency petition. We're going to stop the foreclosure. Then, after we stop that foreclosure, we have 2 weeks to go ahead and fill up the balance of the paperwork. And that paperwork now from that thick is about this thick. So not that much difference.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's where we have to provide pay stubs, profit and loss, taxes, look at their income, look at their expenses, look at how much they have at the end of the month, and whether or not it's feasible, whether or not we can make a plan that's going to work. Okay? And once that plan is made, we provide it to the trustee, and the trustee's going to look at it and he's going to say, okay, yeah, you know, that looks affordable. They can afford this payment. Judge, Your Honor, this looks good. And the judge stamps the plan, and you make those payments.
Okay, now the trustee, what is the mechanics of the players? Because we, as you know, we did a show on partition, and we had the judge, and then we had the receiver or the referee.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a similar situation where we have a bankruptcy judge, what they call a bench, sitting on the bench, and then he or she appoints a trustee that will handle the...
Well, there's different trustees already. So in Chapter 13, for example, there's Devin Durham Burke in the South Bay.
Okay.
There's David Burchard in the San Mateo, San Francisco area. And there's Martha Berninsky in the East Bay. Okay.
These are people that specialize in this.
These are the people who are the trustees for Chapter 13s only. They
I
specialize
see.
and focus on this. Their job is to work with the debtors and make sure they're in compliance as to all the paperwork being feasible, putting a plan together.
Now, do they work for the county or are they self-employed? This is their
Business. I don't
Are
believe they work for the county. I believe
Okay.
there might be some governmental
So
appointment involved, but they have their own
They're
business.
outside. Are they attorneys by trade or are they just ombudsmen or
They
just
could be
a
attorneys,
professional?
they could be CPAs.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, and they're very organized. It's very
It would
nice
have
working
to
with
be,
them
right? Yeah.
because they're going to look at your plan and they're going to give you 10 to 20 points on why this plan is not going to work.
Okay, and that's the individual that reads that stack of documents,
Yes.
not the judge, not the bankruptcy judge.
The judge reads it also, but the trustee is the one that will look at your plan and tell the judge, Your Honor, we disagree with this. And then
Okay.
we have to come along and say, well, no, this is the way we want it. And if we get to that point, then the judge makes the final decision.
I see.
So we don't see the judge very often in the simple not simple, but the Chapter 13s that are pretty standard.
Okay. So number 7 was when there is not a lot of assets available.
Right, so number 7 is not a lot of assets available, but I always give the example of a client that I had, okay? And I'll never forget, he had a foreclosure coming up the next day, and I was in the hospital because my first child was born. And the night before the foreclosure, I filed the Chapter 11 from the hospital on my laptop.
Wow.
And at that time, the property was worth about $1.5 million, okay? And the debts were about $3 million, okay? We filed the Chapter 11. We stayed in the Chapter 11 for about 1 year. He made no mortgage payments. And then we converted it to a Chapter 7. Why did we convert to a Chapter 7? There was no equity. There's no reason to be in the 11. He didn't have any assets worth saving anything. Okay. Then we get to the Chapter 7. Now, the trustee in the Chapter 7 is a little different than the ones in the Chapter 13. Her or his job is to look at your assets and say, hey, wait a minute. Excuse me. You have something that's worth value. You better pay me for that so I can distribute it among the creditors.
I see.
Okay. But the time we converted to a Chapter 7, his property was still underwater. Okay. So the trustee said, look, you know what? There's no value to this house. You can keep your house. Let the lenders do what they want with it. The lenders never did anything, and 6 months later, the property has already gone up in value. So we were able to go through a bankruptcy process, and now his house is worth $2.7 million.
Wow.
So it was a strategy that we were able to use to get rid of other debt at a time when his house was worthless, and get him through the bankruptcy process, through a Chapter 7, and eventually gain back his equity in the house. Now, it's not always you can go along and not make any mortgage payments, but sometimes it works out.
Yeah. And properties don't always go up in value.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
So, and what we're speaking about here will happen in any market.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Recession, prosperity. Now, just to succinctly go over the 7, 13, and 11.
Okay. So the Chapter 7, I'll give you a simple day. A client comes in, usually in a Chapter 7, like I said, there's no equity in the house, okay, in most cases. The biggest issue they might have is credit card debt, or they might have pending lawsuits against them for debt that they owe or judgments against them. We file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and within 3 months, their debt is gone. Now what happens is they meet with us, we prepare the bankruptcy petition. Within a month, we go to something called a 341 hearing, which is also known as a meeting of creditors, okay? And then myself and my client will attend this meeting. It's about, let's say 7 minutes long. And then the trustee will ask the client questions. Just like how we're sitting over here, they're gonna ask them, hey, are you telling the truth? Is this your name? Do you live here? Is this your debt? Is this your assets? And they go through that petition and they make sure everything is the truth. And then if they're satisfied, within 3 months you get a letter in the mail saying, hey, your debt is gone. And that's death of Chapter 7. The Chapter 13 will give you the ability to pay back your debt. Okay? You're actually going to pay it back, but you may pay 10 cents on the dollar. You may pay 20 cents on the dollar.
And you may pay it later.
And you may pay it over 5 years or 3 years. And also, if you've missed mortgage payments on your house, you can pay those arrearages in a payment plan. So you could file your bankruptcy, you can start paying your regular mortgage payment, and you can take those missed payments, the lump sum amount, and divide it over 36 or 60 months, 3 or 5 years, and make installment payments over that. That gives you the ability to stay in your home, pay your mortgage, and catch up.
Nice. Now, the difference, is that somebody that really wants to make things right?
Correct.
As opposed to somebody that wants to walk and start anew? Is it a number 7, or is it really about how much resources they have and how much assets they have?
Well, if you have assets, you'll do a 13 to keep your assets.
Yeah.
If someone wants to really keep their house and pay the regular mortgage payment and be happy after 5 years that they're current with their mortgage, that would be the example I gave.
Okay, because I remember over my career, people often say, I filed bankrupt, but I didn't file, and they'd mention the number, I filed a such and such, as if I didn't go the route of...
Well, I think what they mean to say, I didn't do a Chapter 7, I didn't just walk away, I did a 13 and I paid something back.
Yeah, in
so
other words, I didn't leave everybody holding the bag, right.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now, does that hurt your credit any less? A 13 versus a 7? I know it's not your...
I think it's don't quote me on this because there's credit repair agencies that do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's a different arena.
But I think it does hurt it just as bad, either bankruptcy. My understanding, again, from what I've heard, is that if you do a 13, since you paid some people back, it looks better, but I don't. And these days, since there have been so many bankruptcies, I wonder if any company or individual looking at somebody's credit report would really hold it
Yeah,
against them.
I think with the difference for the credit seminars I've been to, you would have a charge off
Mhm.
for these Visa, MasterCards and whatnot, and they were left holding the bag, versus a settlement in Chapter 13 where they paid 10 cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar, so at least they got something.
Right, exactly,
Right?
exactly.
Now, when you say you go to these settlements with the creditor, somebody from MasterCard's not going to be at that meeting, right?
You know, nobody ever shows up. If anybody, you'll have the IRS over there, maybe the tax board, maybe a really upset creditor. But in most cases, you're not going to see American Express. You're not going
I
to see
see.
credit
Okay.
cards over there.
Okay.
The biggest thing I see for Chapter 13 with involving real estate now is where an individual comes in and says, I really want to sell my house, but I can't sell it if the foreclosure is next week. And if the foreclosure is next week, I don't get the chance to really put my property in the market, stage it, and make the most money on it. I have to take what I get at the foreclosure.
Right.
So what we usually do is we file a bankruptcy, so the automatic stay kicks in. Then we try and buy about 60 to 120 days to allow the individual to work with his realtor to stage the property, to list it in the open market, and get top dollar for it.
Okay, that was, you stole my thunder there. How do we go about that process? Now, is that still you're filing 13?
You're still filing a 13, yes.
Okay. And is that still in the bankruptcy? Are they late on payments, or
Correct. They're late on payments.
They're late on
Or
payments.
they haven't made payments in like a year.
and they see it coming?
Right,
There's a
right.
problem. And again, this is somebody. It might be a nice house, nice family, nice neighborhood, but when they get laid off, they get laid off.
Correct.
And when they run out of funds.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter whether it's in a high-end neighborhood, medium neighborhood, $3 million home, $4 million home, it doesn't
Right.
matter.
And these are life-changing events. Perhaps one spouse is already retired or
Mhm.
was in a car accident, and then the other person got laid off, and it's just happenstance,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And so this is a strategy where they'd come to somebody like you and say, how do we get out of this?
Exactly. And that's a tool that I've used on many, many occasions, is where we file the bankruptcy, we stop the foreclosure, I work with the realtor and the escrow office, because escrow is so important, because
Sure.
there's so many legal documents you need. And I'm sure you've dealt with escrow sometimes where you as a real estate agent and escrow office are on different wavelengths regarding
Yeah,
items.
Yeah.
So as an individual, the individual's got to have his attorney, realtor, and escrow office all on the same wavelength.
Correct.
And the reason for that is once the bankruptcy is filed, the foreclosure is stopped, the property is listed. But once the property is listed, the minute an offer comes in, that offer has to get approved by the bankruptcy court. So the judge has to sign a
Interesting.
piece of paper saying, I approve. Now that order has to go to escrow, so escrow can fund. Now if escrow disagrees with it, if their office, their title office or their title attorneys disagree with it, we got a problem.
That's where the escrow office always wants to get that official document from the court that's stamped and confirmation of sale.
Correct.
And it also has to be word perfect, right? You can't have one sentence off or one word
Mm.
off. Everything has to be
It's got to be exact.
exact.
It's got to be exact. I had one case where the escrow officer actually got it wrong and spelled the buyer's name wrong. So luckily the judge's clerk was nice enough to me to get that fixed really quick. Otherwise we have to go wait another month to get it fixed.
Right. Now this is another situation, of course, that might, when the real estate community sees they're in bankruptcy, they may think that they're on the ground bleeding and we
Right.
can take advantage of them, which is not necessarily the case. If it's a nice
Correct.
house in a nice neighborhood, the market rate's the market rate.
That's correct. And there's nothing to say that you have to be completely without any money to file bankruptcy. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, we've spoken about that before.
Mm-hmm,
And I know you've recently, in the last few days, had 4 bankruptcies.
That's
Clients
correct.
come to you.
That's correct. We've done it because, some of these all 4 individuals had foreclosures coming up, and some of them were making a lot of money monthly, but they just couldn't keep up with that mortgage payment that jumped because their second loan adjusted, or their loan modification was denied, or the individual lost a job. So for those reasons, it wasn't affordable anymore, and they couldn't make their payments, and that foreclosure kicked in. So each one of the bankruptcies I filed is giving them the option to list the property and sell it in the summertime or apply for another modification, or try to come up with the money and pay over 5 years.
Now, this is a situation you might have to do some counseling where people might have feel financial humiliation about going this process. And don't you do a little almost counseling there that this is the right thing for your family, it's the right thing for you, and there's nothing dishonorable about it? You're just trying to reorganize.
Well, you know, I think that's as an attorney, that's a huge part of my job, is being a counselor. But in bankruptcy, I guess, since if you could really see bankruptcy as a tool more than anything, and it's a tool to get you ahead, then the client will start to understand that, you know what, it's not nothing about it.
Right.
It's just making me reorganize and get ahead and improve my financial situation.
I know I do that as a real estate agent or a court-appointed realtor, that I have to be upbeat and keep the parties upbeat.
Yeah,
Right?
you do.
That we are doing the right thing, we are moving forward. Okay.
Yeah, I enjoy it. We have a big whiteboard when I meet with my clients, and we draw pictures. And I throw my hands up, and we get excited. And at the end of the day, you realize the success you could have if you make this happen.
So that's another thing where they come to you, they're driving to you, and it's just gloom and doom, and they're leaving, and they might be able to sleep that night.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
And you know, if you haven't paid a mortgage in 1 year, and you know rents are $3,500 a month at a reasonable price, I think you feel pretty good realizing that.
You're getting by, yeah. And then in terms of the market and the strategy, your strategies will change when the market changes.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. It does depend on the market. It depends on whether banks are modifying loans. It depends on property values. It depends on the job market. If individuals have income, are going to have income that they can afford these properties, even after you file bankruptcy, they do need to come to reality that, look, in the end of the day, you still got to pay your mortgage. Right. So you got to decide whether or not you're going to keep your house or you're going to sell it.
Now, in terms of, so we have the house here, bankruptcy. Now, of course, we have the garage, and there's 2 cars in a garage, and they have car payments. The cars are inside this bubble too, correct? During the bankruptcy?
Everything is inside the
Everything's
bubble.
inside the bubble.
That's correct.
Now, how do you handle the cars? What if the court or the trustee say you don't need a $100,000 car? Perhaps you should get a $30,000 car. Do they have the ability to say you need to sell that car that's $600 a month?
Well, if in your bankruptcy plan, in your Chapter 13, if you can show that you can afford these items, and at the end of the day, you're paying the credit cards a fair amount, there's a possibility that they'll leave you alone. The trustee won't say anything. But if you have a $100,000 car and it's paid off, that's a huge issue because that's equity.
Yes.
That's money that should be distributed to the creditors.
Well, when you have a husband and wife and they're both working and they need 2 cars, will they be allowed to keep both cars?
Sure. If you
Okay.
can pay for it, yes.
If you can pay for it.
If you can pay the monthly payment, and unless they're paid off again, then you have to be able to pay that equal amount to the creditors. You can keep those cars. So, for example, if you have a car that's worth $20,000 and it's paid off, and
you need it to get to work, though.
you need to get to work, but that's still $20,000 in equity. Okay, in a Chapter 13, you have to pay an equivalent of $20,000 over 5 years in monthly payments, if it's a paid-off car. If there's monthly payments to the lender, then you just pay that monthly.
Now, in terms of, so when you meet with somebody from A to Z, what is the time frame? Is it a year, 2 years? What is the process for?
Oh, the process to file the bankruptcy?
Well, from A to Z, when they walk into your door for the first time to everything's over with.
So it depends. So some clients come in with the foreclosure next week. Then the full process could take 3 or 5 years if we've chosen to go into bankruptcy to keep the property. Okay. If they've come in to sell the property and just buy time, then it can be 5 or 6 months. And then at the end of 6 months, we basically dismiss the case because we don't need it. We just filed it to sell the property, close the sale, get the money, and get rid of the case. That's the only reason we would need to do that.
I see.
But there are times where we do something called pre-bankruptcy planning, where we don't file immediately, but we advise the client on what they need to do within certain time frame guidelines in order to get the most success out of their bankruptcy going down the line.
Now, how often will a family keep the house? It's your experience. If you had 100 clients, will half be able to keep their house and the other half sells? Is it, I know it varies on the clientele, but
It depends, because sometimes what happens is the first 2 or 3 years they're really motivated to keep that house.
yes.
After 3 years, they're like, this is really expensive, or we can't. Because sometimes what we do is we do a step-up plan where we start low monthly payments with it going higher and higher towards the end of 5 years, which gives them the ability to, make financial changes in their life to afford the payments. And after 2 or 3 years, they really have to think about whether or not they can afford this house. Then they might sell it, or
Yeah. And this is where some of your counseling might pay off, is say, do you really need a 4-bedroom house in a fancy neighborhood?
exactly.
And they say, yes, we do. And then after a year or 2 or 3, say, maybe we can do a 2-bedroom townhouse in a modest neighborhood.
That's exactly it. And also, it's really a lot of number crunching, because even if we do the bankruptcy, we say, look, this is your payment, but how much is it going to cost you to go outside and rent right now? It might be very expensive to rent, so you might as well just stay here in the bankruptcy
Oh, that's a good point.
for a few years, and then after a few years, see what happens.
That's a good point.
Because you're paying to live somewhere, you might as well stay at your house and pay that amount.
So the main thing for these clients is they need to be able to sleep at night.
Correct.
Okay.
Sleep at night and keep what they can.
There you go. Vinod, thanks for coming out today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you have come back.
You got it.
Okay. Thanks again for watching Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We will see you next week.